In this podcast episode, we want to introduce you to our BCEN friend, Barbara Weintraub. Come along as Michael Dexter and Holly Briggs talk with Barbara about her career journey, the past, present, and future of nursing as she sees it. This episode is called A Heart for Nursing.
Hello, and welcome to the BCEN and Friends podcast, where we hold interesting conversations about learning with a range of thought leaders, BCEN certification holders, and industry professionals. But most importantly, to create value and insight for you, our professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. We hope you find our discussions interesting, informative, sometimes funny, sometimes serious, but always valuable. I'm Holly Briggs, a professional development specialist at BCEN and one of your hosts for today. I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Dexter. He's the Director of Professional Development at BCEN. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Holly. Great to be with you today.
Thanks for being here. In this episode of BCEN and Friends, we have Barbara Weintraub, an experienced emergency nurse with a passion for pediatric care and leadership. Michael, would you please introduce us to our BCEN and friend, Barbara?
Yeah, I would be happy to do so. Barbara has a lot of experience, and I'm sure she has some good stories to share. She's been an ER nurse since 1985 after initially obtaining a bachelor's degree in biology from Northwestern in 1983. She completed her bachelor's degree in nursing in 1984. And later, Barbara obtained a master's in public health from the University of Illinois at Chicago in 1991 and a master's in nursing from Rush University in 1999. Barbara has one son who's 32 years old and lives in Boston and is obtaining a PhD in computer cybersecurity. Barb says he's the smarty in the family, and Barb also has 3 cats. She's been very active in emergency nursing, having both presented and been published on a wide variety of topics, including pediatric emergency care and improving patient flow. She's been an active member of the Emergency Nurses Association, having served in both state and national positions. So Barbara, welcome to the BCEN and Friends podcast. It is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so tell us about your career a little bit more and your nursing journey. And, we mentioned leadership, we mentioned pediatrics, but just tell us a little bit more in general about how your nursing career has gone over the years.
Sure. Well, it got an interesting start. I always knew I liked medical type things. It always interested me, but I wasn't really quite sure what I was going to do in medicine. So my dad was always like, well, if you're going to go into medicine, you might as well be a doctor. So I went to Northwestern thinking I was going to be a doctor and majoring in pre-med type stuff. But as I progressed through that at Northwestern, it was kind of pricey. And they knew if I was going to be a doctor, that was going to be 4 more years. So I thought, I don't really know what the difference is, like at the bedside level. What does a nurse do that's different than what a doctor does, that's different than a physical therapist does, than a pharmacist? I really wasn't really sure what they all did. You're 18 or 19 years old and, you're like, yeah, I'm going to pick that career. So I got a job in a hospital as a nursing assistant so that I could see up close what everybody did and see what interested me. And almost from the very first day that I was working there, I knew that nursing was what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the one who spent the time with the patient, who explained things to the patient, who helped them through that difficult journey that they were on. And I have never once regretted my decision.
Well, that's great. And, you talk about the way that things change and the way our roles develop. And I know as a new nurse for myself, and for many years into nursing, I was always afraid of pediatrics. And then it took me a while to get used to kids. And now I love taking care of kids. But you worked in pediatric care. You hold, I believe, a certified pediatric nurse practitioner. Correct. And also the CPEN certification. So how did you get interested in pediatric care? Have you always been wanting to care for kids, or did you also have some of those initial fears of caring for children as a newer nurse?
Oh, I had the same fears. I love kids. I wasn't afraid of like interacting with them, but taking care of them was, it was heart-wrenching. And I thought, I don't know if I'm strong enough to take care of, sick kids. It hurts my heart. But I remember one day in the ER, you know how there are days where you walk in and you look around and you're like, this is a good team. We can handle anything today. And that was one of those days. I was working with a great physician and the other nurses were great. And I was like, we can take anything. We're good. And a parent carried in one of the sickest little children that I've ever seen in my life. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know where to start. And I thought, it's okay. I'm with a great doctor. And I looked up at him and he looked at me and he sort of had the same look of terror on his face that I had on mine, because this was one sick little kid and this was just a general ER. It was a really good ER, but a general ER. And I knew at that minute, I'm like, I don't mind if I don't know everything as long as somebody in the room knows it. So I thought, I don't ever want to be in that position again. So that was where I started my journey in pediatrics, so that I could at least feel some level of comfort when something like that happens again.
Okay, great. And so with the pediatrics that you've cared for and now having this, not only this board certification as a CPEN, but also as a nurse practitioner certified in pediatric care, how do you feel now caring for them?
The heart hurting is still there. I mean, that part is always difficult because it's a kid. But I have the comfort of knowing that if there's anything that can be done for the kid, that I can do that, and that's some comfort. The terror isn't there anymore, but it's interesting. Years ago, back before our tertiary children's hospital was all the way downtown, it was in like the north side of the city, and I worked there for a while so that I would get as much exposure as I could to sick kids. The first day that I walked into the ER, I looked at their tracking board, and I'd been an ER nurse for maybe 10 years already. And I looked at their tracking board. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know any of these diagnoses. It was overwhelming. I thought, how can I have worked in the ER for 10 years and not know anything that's wrong? But you learn and you immerse yourself in it. And you get to a point where, again, after you've worked in the ER for a while, you're like, I can handle pretty much everything. So I feel like, I know I haven't seen everything, but I feel like whatever comes through, I know, start with airway, move on to breathing. I feel calm, at least going through the process.
Yeah. Well, great. And, outside of pediatrics, you also have a passion for nursing leadership. And you've talked about improving patient flow and different ways to build organizational infrastructure to support nurses and to build better leaders. So where did you find that passion for leadership, and where do you see some of our biggest gaps currently lie in healthcare leadership?
Well, those are two really big questions.
Big questions, yeah. I'm throwing the big questions at you today.
So the leadership came, I guess, just like everything else in my career, sort of came out of left field. I was working, we'd opened a pediatric emergency department at the hospital that I worked at. And I started as the educator, and then I became a coordinator, and then I became, all of a sudden, and I was working as a nurse practitioner, and then all of a sudden they needed somebody to run the unit. And so now I was working as a nurse practitioner and being the manager. And then they needed somebody to be the director. And I'm like, okay, now I'm the nurse practitioner and the educator and the director. Because that's how it is in nursing, you say, oh yeah, I would love to do that. So I kind of got pulled into leadership without really meaning to head there. But once I got there, I noticed that you're caught between competing priorities. There's the things that need to be done at the unit level, at the nursing level, things that need to be done to help staff who are bedside take care of patients. I feel like that's your job as a leader, is to be the behind the scenes person to help the people who are taking care of the patients. But then there's all the priorities from above, from the board or the CNO or the CEO, and the things that they want you to do. And of course, they're not always in alignment with each other. So a difficult dance to dance, and I probably haven't always been good at it because I was too strongly on one side or too strongly on the other. But I've learned that you have to somehow align those two priorities, the ones above and below, so that everybody's heading in the same direction. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges as a leader. And I think today there's in addition to that, there's the huge issue of not enough nurses, and so we're hiring agency nurses right and left, and that cripples the hospital budget because our how much we can spend is really mostly capped by reimbursement. And I mean, that's a whole nother nightmare that we've never really faced a nursing shortage like the one we have now. And I think it's going to change the face of nursing leadership going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like there's always been a variety of struggles in leadership, whether it is the patient throughput or staffing on the floors that lead to holding in the ED or whatever it might be. But definitely the overarching theme currently seems to be just an overall labor shortage everywhere, and trying to not only figure out nurse staffing, but figure out alternative ways to care, whether it's through non-licensed personnel or addition of paramedics, EMTs. Everybody's trying to figure out a solution to this staffing crisis.
Yeah, and I think I felt like a few years ago we were making some progress with throughput, and hospital leadership was beginning to learn that you couldn't just have patients waiting in the ER because they couldn't go upstairs, and we were making progress. But because everyone is short-staffed in the hospital, not just the ER, the ICU is, that all of a sudden throughput is kind of, people have just decided they're going to have to stay in ER. We can't send them to the floor because the nurses upstairs are going to quit, and we don't have anybody working in ICU. And it's really exacerbated that issue, which in turn I think has exacerbated turnover in the ER, because it's really difficult to hear. The ICU nurses have 2 patients and they're really balking at taking a third. And you're like, I have 2 ICU patients and 3 ER patients, and I've never even been trained in the ICU. So what's the story here?
Yeah, it's definitely a dynamic situation with the workforce. And one of the other questions I wanted to ask you about is kind of just the dynamics of healthcare and how it's changed over the years. And I'll give you a few examples. I know you do some stuff with transport as well. And over the last several years, there's been more and more of these mobile stroke units appear. We're seeing more and more patients with LVADs living in the community. There's different ways to control massive hemorrhage, like Roboa catheters. So there's always new technology and there's new changes coming out. But where do you see emergency medicine changing the most over your time as an emergency nurse? And where do you feel like new things in emergency medicine are heading?
I think the good changes that I've seen, when I first became an ER nurse, and this does make me feel like I'm, 12,000 years old.
No, we don't want you to feel that way.
In addition to glass IV bottles and, the 3 bottle method for chest tubes, we did all sorts of crazy things that really hadn't been proven. We did, ice water lavages for GI bleeds, and we didn't really do anything for strokes or heart attacks. We didn't really have anything. So one of the most fantastic things that I've seen is the change in stroke care, because when you saw somebody having a stroke, you knew that was the end of their life as they knew it. And even if they lived, it was going to be entirely different. And now you can see somebody coming in having a stroke, and then they go home in 2 days perfectly normal, and it's like a miracle. And there's a lot of things that we've fortunately done research on, and on like ice water lavages, that didn't work. That actually made people sicker. And rotating tourniquets, who decided that was a good treatment? We got rid of those. So I love that we've become more research oriented. And nursing, I feel like, has come into its own as a profession of its own. We don't just carry out doctors' orders anymore. You can tell how much the doctors rely on the nurses to manage the patient and let them know this is somebody who's sick and you need to see them now, and this is somebody who can wait, even though their complaint sounds terrible. And you know that you're performing something that's not just an assistant, like somebody who couldn't quite make it as a doctor. You're a educated, well-trained professional that has their own specific role in healthcare. Where do I see it going? I think because there's physician shortages as well, I think that nurses will continue to do more and more things. There's a lot of things that we do now that only physicians used to be able to do. And as there are more and more things that physicians themselves need to do, they can't do everything. Those things the nurses get trained to do. So there's a lot of opportunities for nurses, and it doesn't have to be as an advanced practice nurse. There's a lot of opportunities in education. There's a lot of opportunities at the bedside where you need really well-educated, trained nurses to take care of people because, like you said, they're going home with technologies that we never dreamed of. People who are going home with VADs. So the first VAD I ever saw was like the size of a patient room, and now they're like
right.
little camcorders. You're walking past people who have a VAD and you don't even know it. So people in the community have a lot more things going on with them, and they get discharged from the hospital so much faster than they used to. I'll never forget when I was a new ER nurse, and one of the patients that was considered, I worked on a surgical floor, and the patient that was really difficult to take care of was a patient who had had cataract surgery because they couldn't cough. So you had to give them cough medicine. They could only eat soft foods. They couldn't turn their head from side to side. They had to remain calm. So you had to do everything for them. And that's hilarious now because cataract surgery is almost like a drive-through procedure.
Right.
So the people who are staying in the hospital are a lot sicker, and then they're going home with a lot of needs that may or may not be met, because I think that's still an opportunity for us, is to figure out how to carry that level of care into the community. Teaching family members for an hour once is not gonna be enough.
Right. Yeah, you made a great point there, especially on the acuity as well. It seems like even in some areas where the overall volume isn't as high as it was maybe 5 years ago, it seems like of the patients that are there, the acuity levels just seem to be getting higher and higher all the time. There's more and more sick people out there, and a lot of patients that used to come to the ER or to the hospital for care are able to manage some of those lesser acute things at home or at an urgent care now. So what the hospital ends up getting is the very, very sick.
Yes, I agree. And I think because of a couple of factors. Number one, our healthcare system is not easy to navigate, even for somebody who's been in healthcare, trying to navigate somebody else's issue from the outside, like dealing with Medicare to get a wheelchair or something. It is not easy. And many people they don't know how to approach that, and sometimes they just give up. And then, of course, there's always the payment issues. We don't consider healthcare something that everybody deserves. And so a lot of people don't come to the hospital when they should have, because they don't want to be burdened with a huge bill. And so when they come in, they are like, their cancer is disseminated, or their heart failure is, it's not reversible, or they have such, I had a man come in who'd had a stroke, and he came in a week later only because his wife bothered him, and he's like, "Can you help me?" I'm like, we could have, if you had come in right away, but he didn't want to have the ER bill, they didn't want to have a hospital bill. So
right,
it was very sad.
Yeah, we've seen so many of those situations, and it's really unfortunate. It impacts them for the rest of their life as well, and it impacts us as nurses also to have to see and deal with some of those disparities.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you before I turn it back over to Holly, with with all of the experiences you've had and the many different avenues of the emergency medicine that you've worked, if somebody was to come to you as a newer nurse and you were to give them some pointers on the importance of lifelong learning, what would that conversation go like, or what would that mean to you to talk to somebody about how important it is for a nurse to be a lifelong learner?
Yeah, and it obviously is something I really obviously believe, since I've done it several times. But healthcare is incredibly complex. I look at what I learned in my nursing program, and when I went back to get my master's degree, I'm like, wait, how do we discover new organs that didn't exist when I was in my bachelor's program? Physiology has changed, and if you rely on what you learned 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you're out of date. And things change much, much faster. The treatments, I was working with a physician. We had a patient with an arterial bleed, and I was like, we need a cat tourniquet. Let's put a cat tourniquet on. He's like, okay, but I don't want his arm to get necrotic. We have to keep releasing. And I said, no, you don't have to do that anymore. This is something new that we've learned. And so I was able to teach him something that I learned, because I'm, a lifelong learner, that you don't have to keep loosening the tourniquet to stop the bleed. You end up with worse outcomes that way. So I wouldn't have known that if I didn't, if I wasn't a lifelong learner and I'd taken a stop the bleed course, and I was able to help this patient and the physician learn something new. So there are a million examples like that. Every single treatment that you learned a year ago is probably different now.
Right. Exactly. Well, those are all some really great points, and I appreciate your insight and your expertise in these different areas. And I want to turn it over to Holly, but I'll jump back in a little bit later on as well. But I did just want to tell you now, thank you so much for your insight and some really, really great conversation we've had here.
Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Barb, I know that, nurses have a great impact, and you've experienced that, I'm sure, in your career, just impacting patients, those that you work with. But I guess the question that I would like to ask is, can you tell us about a person or maybe just a moment in your career that really greatly impacted you?
I was working, I was actually in grad school, so I was working part-time at various different hospitals. And so it just so happened that I was working at a hospital that was a level 1 trauma center. And the medics brought in a patient who'd been in a trauma. He was covered with blood and his clothes had been cut off, and he had injuries all over, and he looked like he was in pretty bad shape. And I was like, okay, take a deep breath. Remember what you learned in TNCC. And I walked up to his head to make sure to maintain C-spine mobilization and check his airway. And the patient opened his eyes and looked at me, and he said, "Hi, Barb." And I'm like, oh, I didn't recognize the patient. And you really, that's not the patient. I'm like, this patient is way too sick. I don't want to know, I don't want this to be a personal friend. But it was one of the policemen from that community who I knew very well, because they were in our ER all the time. And at that moment, I was like, I almost went from being a nurse to being, I don't know, his support person. And he just grabbed my hand and he said, "Please don't let me die. Please don't let me die. Please don't let me die." And so I stayed after the end of my shift, and I went with him to CAT scan, and I went with him up to the OR, and I held his hand and I reassured him, even though I wasn't really sure that he was going to make it, but I reassured him, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I'm here for you. And I was really shaken up at the end of the shift, and I realized I don't think I did anything for him. I don't think I gave him a tetanus shot. I don't think I did anything that I would normally consider my job to do as a nurse, because I was so busy comforting him. And about 6 months later, he came back into the ER, and he said, "I just wanted to thank you for saving my life." And I was so humbled, because I thought, I didn't even give you a tetanus shot. I don't think I cleaned your wounds. All I did was talk to you. But in that moment, that's what he needed. And for him, that was what had saved his life. And it made me rethink everything about what I thought being a good ER nurse was. It's not being the best at starting IVs, and it's not knowing the drip rates off the top of your head. It's accompanying that person through their journey at their level and making it the best situation that it can be. And it really changed the way I looked at what it meant to be a nurse.
I enjoy that story so much. I mean, you hear it, all the time when you go to conferences and hear people speak about how patients, they need us to be very smart. They need us to be very educated and to know our processes and just have a very far depth of understanding of what it is that we do. But really and honestly, if that doesn't also translate with care and compassion and being a human at the bedside, then all of those other things, like, they may benefit from it, but they likely won't remember that. They're going to remember, the comfort that you provided for them, those human moments that you have with them, in what is possibly the worst day of their life. Like, that's what they're going to remember. And so I appreciate your story, because again, it's just a great reminder that, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. It's awesome when you can be, sometimes scary, but to let your patient know that you're with them in that very tough moment, that's really what they're going to remember. So, wow, great story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure. It's something I keep in the back of my head. So I'm humbled every day that I have the opportunity to help somebody and remember that it's just one day in my life, but it's the worst day in their life. That's
a really great reminder. I do have a few rapid fire questions. You can go as far into these as you'd like, or you could just give us some quick answers. But if you could choose, what would you do if you were not in your current role? And it can be anything. If you could just pick something that you're not currently doing, what would you do?
Okay, this sounds so funny because it's completely different. I would be an interior designer. I love decorating. I love people who work with me know that I'm a little bit nutty, and I'm like, I have to like bedazzle my tape dispenser, and then the face has to match the thing on my desk, and my files are all organized and color coded. So I feel like I'm a Gemini, so I'm allowed to have these two different sides.
Okay, so interior decorating, check. I am also going to ask you about some of your favorites. If you don't have one or you can't think of one, you can always tell me skip. I will just ask you very quickly, what would you say is your favorite book currently? Or it can be of all time, but...
let's see. I think one of my favorite books was... I read when I was growing up is A Secret Garden. I loved that book. It was perfect growing up as a little girl, and I still have the book that I read when I was growing up. It was a gift from my grandmother, and every once in a while I'll take it out and go back into that fairy tale world.
It's a good book. I've read that one as well. What would you say is your favorite movie?
I have a lot of movies I love, but it would either be Field of Dreams or, oh my gosh, what's the name of the movie where they break out of prison? It's Morgan Freeman and
The Shawshank Redemption.
Shawshank Redemption. Thank you. Yes. I love two movies. They're completely different, but I love those two movies.
Oh, I agree with you as well. You picked two that are on the top of my list as well. Last but not least, what would you say is one of your favorite songs?
I really like the oh my gosh, now I'm gonna forget it. It's oh, what's his name? It's just gonna kill me. It's he's a Scottish singer. He has songs out now. He just had a new one that came out. Yeah. He's my favorite, but I can't remember the name of.
That's okay. Sometimes I land in that same place and I have to start like either acting it out or like singing a few bars. I will not ask you to do that now, but I'm appealing to the audience that I'm talking to and like, hey, I don't remember the name or the person, but I really like this. I understand. Well, another good question. What would you say is like your go-to kind of comfort food and or meal?
Aside from the obvious chocolate, I love pretzels and hummus. I mean, I love hummus with many different things, but I love pretzels and hummus. It's just, and I feel like it's not totally trashy food, so I don't feel too guilty.
Mm-hmm.
But I would make do with guacamole if I had to. That would be a good sacrifice.
Those are two very fun, like dips that feel like real food. You know what I mean? Like they're filling and delicious. So, do you have any hobbies or interests, obviously outside of nursing, and interior design? Sometimes I like to indulge my creative side, and I have like a lot of craft things. I have dried flowers and beads and garlands and twine, and I have like probably 25 pictures that I've made that I don't know what to do with now that I've made them, sitting in my living room. Waiting for me to decide what to do with them. But I just like to make, beautiful pictures, or at least beautiful to me, with various different mixed media type things. I like art that is a little bit of like the mixed textures and, that kind of give you a sense of depth to them. So I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your favorites with us and getting us a chance to kind of get to know you a little better. If our audience would like to follow you online, are there any social media platforms that they could follow you on?
Sure. I'm on Facebook and also on LinkedIn.
For those of you that are listening that know about the BCEN Learn conferences, we'll have one in Las Vegas in November of 2022, and we have another one in Dallas in May of 2023. And Barb will be speaking for us in Dallas. So we're excited about that she gets to share more of her expertise with the rest of the nursing community.
Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity. I like to pass it along.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you, and I've really enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you so much for, again, being a guest on this podcast. And it was just really, really good to hear the insight you provided. And I also really appreciated the story that you told about your police officer friend.
Well, thank you. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk.
I want to take time to thank Barbara Weintraub for joining us for this episode of BCEN and Friends. Thank you, Barbara, for sharing your time, your journey, and your expertise, and just your stories with us. And to all our listeners, we hope you will stay tuned as we continue with BCEN and Friends and bring you new and meaningful content and perspectives. If you do have a suggestion for an episode, please email us at bcn@bcn.org. I'm Holly Briggs here with Michael Dexter, and on behalf of the entire BCEN team, we thank and celebrate you all for what you're doing as professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. Until next time, we are out.